My name is Clara. I've been married to Daniel for 4 years. And for 4 years, I've been quietly dying inside, not because of my husband, but because of the family that came with him. Let me take you back to the beginning because you need to understand what I walked into before I can tell you what happened at that dinner table. Daniel is the youngest of 3 brothers. His mother, Margaret, is the kind of woman who runs her household like a corporation, cold, calculated, and convinced that her way is the only way. She's never raised her voice at me. She's never had to. Margaret destroys people with smiles and silence. When Daniel first brought me home to meet her, I was nervous. I wore my nicest dress. I baked a lemon cake from scratch. I said please and thank you and laughed at the right moments. Margaret looked at me across the dinner table, tilted her head slightly, and said, "You're not quite what I pictured for Daniel." That was it. No elaboration. Just that sentence, hanging in the air like smoke. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table and whispered, "She says that to everyone." She didn't. I checked. His older brother Marcus married a woman named Helena, a woman whose family Margaret had known for 20 years. Their other brother, James, married a woman from their church. Both were welcomed immediately. Both were called daughters within the first month. I was called Daniel's girlfriend for a year after our engagement. I told myself it didn't matter. I loved Daniel. Daniel loved me. We built a good life, a small house, 2 dogs, routines that felt like home. He cooked on Sundays. I handled the finances. We laughed a lot. We fought fairly. We were good together. But every family gathering felt like a test I hadn't been given the study material for. Margaret would make comments about my cooking. "Clara, this is interesting. We usually make it with butter." She'd ask questions that weren't really questions. "Are you planning to go back to work full-time? Or is this the plan?" She'd look at my outfits with that slight tilt of her head, never saying anything, just assessing. Daniel's brothers were fine. Marcus was polite. James was friendly enough. But their wives, Helena especially, had formed a tight circle with Margaret that I was never fully invited into. They had their inside jokes. Their group chat that I wasn't in. Their girls' lunches that I heard about after the fact. I spent 4 years on the outside of a glass door, watching a family that was technically mine but never felt like it. I brought it up to Daniel twice. The first time, he said, "My mom just takes time to warm up." The second time, he said, "Clara, you might be reading too much into things." So I stopped bringing it up. And I started shrinking. I stopped trying so hard at gatherings. Stopped baking the cakes nobody praised. Stopped asking Margaret questions about her life, hoping she'd ask about mine. I became quiet, agreeable, easy to ignore. I thought that was the price of peace. I had no idea it was being mistaken for weakness. It was Marcus who first mentioned the family meetings. Apparently, Margaret held them monthly, just the core family, meaning herself, Daniel's father, a soft-spoken man named Gerald who agreed with everything Margaret said, Marcus and Helena, James and his wife Priya. These meetings had been happening for years. Daniel went. He never told me what was discussed. I didn't ask. Until Helena accidentally mentioned it over coffee. Not in the group chat I wasn't in, but in a one-on-one moment where her guard slipped. "Margaret's going to bring up the house situation at the next meeting," Helena said, then caught herself. "Oh. Daniel probably told you already." He hadn't. The house situation was this. Daniel's grandparents had left behind a property, a lake house worth nearly $400,000. The family had been debating what to do with it. Sell it, keep it, rent it, split the proceeds. I hadn't been included in a single conversation about it, even though Daniel and I were a household, even though decisions about that money would affect our future. When I asked Daniel about it that night, he went quiet in a way I'd learned to read. The way that meant he knew something uncomfortable. "It's just preliminary," he said. "Nothing's decided." Was I going to be included? He paused one beat too long. "At some point," he said. That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling the first real crack of something I'd been ignoring for years. I was not considered part of this family. Not in the ways that mattered. The dinner was Margaret's idea. She called it a family reset, her words, in the group invitation she sent. It was to be held at their main house, a Sunday dinner, all spouses included. I thought, maybe foolishly, that this was her finally trying to bring me in. I got dressed carefully. I was warm in the car. I told Daniel I was glad we were going. He nodded, kept his eyes on the road.
Didn't say much.
I should have read that better. We arrived. The house smelled like roast and candles. The table was set formally, the kind of table setting that signals this is not a casual meal. Everyone was already seated when we walked in. Gerald at the head, Margaret at the other end, Marcus and Helena on one side, James and Priya on the other. One empty seat for Daniel. One for me. Margaret smiled when we came in. Good, she said. We can begin. The meal started normally, food passed, small talk, questions about work. I relaxed slightly. I even laughed at something James said. Then Margaret set down her fork, folded her hands, and the table went quiet in a way that felt practiced. I want to address something as a family, she said. Something we've been discussing for several months now. She looked at Daniel. He was looking at his plate. We care about Daniel, she continued, and we care about his future, which is why we've had some honest conversations among ourselves about the direction of his life. I felt something cold move through me. We took a vote, Margaret said, on whether Clara is the right fit for this family. And for Daniel. The room was silent. I heard myself breathe. The results, she said, unfolding a small piece of paper, an actual piece of paper like this was a board meeting, were 4-1. The family's position is that this marriage is not what's best for Daniel, and we are formally requesting that he reconsider. I turned to Daniel. He was still looking at his plate. I have replayed that moment 10,000 times. The way Margaret's voice stayed perfectly even. The way Helena straightened in her chair like she'd been waiting for this. The way Priya, who I'd always thought was the kindest one, looked at the tablecloth instead of at me. And Daniel, who was still looking at his plate. Say something, I said to him. My voice came out steady.
I don't know how.
Inside, I was completely hollow. He looked up finally. His eyes were red at the edges. He'd known this was coming. The car ride now made perfect sense. The silence. The careful way he'd held the steering wheel. Clara, did you know about this? A pause. 1 second.
2.
They told me yesterday, he said. Ask them not to do it tonight. I told them it wasn't right. But you came anyway, I said. You brought me here anyway. He opened his mouth, closed it. I pushed back my chair, stood up, and walked out of the dining room. I didn't run. I didn't cry. I walked through that pristine hallway, past the family photos on the wall. All of them, every single one, taken before I existed in that family, and I opened the front door and stood on the porch in the November cold without my coat. Daniel came out 2 minutes later. I heard Margaret say something sharp behind him before the door closed. Clara, please. Who was the one? I asked. What? 4-1.
Who voted for me?
He was quiet for a moment.
Priya, he said.
I almost laughed. Priya, who hadn't looked at me. Priya, the one I'd spoken to least. The one I'd written off as indifferent. What happens now? I asked. According to the vote. Nothing, he said quickly. Nothing happens. Clara, I'm not. They don't get to decide. But they held the vote, Daniel. Someone had to suggest it. Someone had to write it down on paper. Someone had to think that was a reasonable thing to do to another human being. He was quiet. Your mother, I said. She's been working toward this since the day I met her. He didn't deny it. I need you to be honest with me, I said. Have you ever, in 4 years, told her that this isn't acceptable? That the way she treats me isn't acceptable? The pause was answer enough. I've tried. Have you ever said stop? Not let's be patient, or she means well, or she takes time to warm up. Have you ever looked at your mother and said, this stops now, or there are consequences? He couldn't answer. I went back inside, picked up my purse and my coat, and asked him for the car keys. He gave them to me. I drove home alone. I spent that night at our kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold, thinking about 4 years. The way I'd bent myself to fit into a space that was never shaped for me. The dinners I'd attended where I left feeling less than I arrived. The conversations I'd replayed looking for what I'd done wrong, when the answer was that I'd done nothing wrong at all. I simply hadn't been chosen. And Daniel, gentle, loving, conflict-avoiding Daniel, who adored me in private and disappeared in public, who held my hand under tables instead of flipping them. I loved him. That was the unbearable part. I loved him, and he had known for 24 hours that his family was planning to sit me down at a dinner table and formally tell me they'd voted me out, and he had driven me there anyway. Not because he agreed with them. I believed that. But because he was still, at 34 years old, more afraid of his mother than he was committed to protecting his wife. The next morning, Priya called me. I almost didn't answer. I'm glad I did. I voted for you, she said, as if I didn't already know. I want you to know I told James beforehand that I thought it was wrong. He agreed, and then voted against you anyway because Margaret asked him to. I'm ashamed of him. I asked her how long this had been planned. Since the lake house came up, she said. Margaret doesn't want the proceeds split with someone she considers an outsider. She's been building the case for months. The vote was her way of making it formal. Money. Of course. There is always money somewhere underneath it. She told the family that you've been isolating Daniel from them, Priya continued. That you discourage him from attending family events. That you've been negative about the family behind closed doors. I sat very still. None of that is true, I said. I know, Priya said. That's why I'm calling. She told me something else then, something that shifted the ground beneath my feet. Margaret had asked Daniel, 3 months ago, to consider a post-nuptial agreement. One that would protect the family's assets, specifically his share of the lake house, in the event of a divorce. And Daniel had not told me. He declined, apparently.
But he hadn't told me it had been asked.
I thanked Priya. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time after we hung up. Then I called a lawyer. I need to tell you what Margaret did because it still takes my breath away. She called Daniel's workplace. Not to make a scene. Not to scream. Margaret doesn't scream. She called his manager, a woman named Dr. Soren who Daniel had worked under for 6 years, and under the guise of a personal concern, she told her that Daniel had been under significant emotional stress due to his marriage, that she was worried about his performance, and that she thought the company should be aware. She framed it as a caring mother reaching out. What she was actually doing was attempting to destabilize Daniel professionally, to create the impression that our marriage was a liability so that when she later pushed for separation, there would already be a paper trail suggesting he'd been struggling. Dr. Soren, to her enormous credit, called Daniel directly and told him exactly what his mother had said. Daniel came home that evening, and I have never seen him look the way he looked. Not angry. Past angry. Somewhere quieter and colder than anger.
She called my job, he said.
I didn't say I told you so. There was nothing satisfying about being right about this. Okay, I said. What do you want to do?
He looked at me.
I want to be done. Done with what, specifically? Done performing for her. Done managing her. Done letting her make decisions about our life.
He sat down.
I've been protecting her from consequences my whole life, Clara. Every time she did something like this, and she's done things like this before, to other people, I smooth it over. I apologized on her behalf. I explained her away. He shook his head. I'm not doing it anymore. What followed was not dramatic. Real change rarely is. Daniel didn't make a grand speech. He didn't send a scorched earth email to the family. He contacted a family therapist and asked if his mother would attend a session.
She refused.
He went anyway with me. We spent 3 months in that office, excavating for years of things we'd both handled badly. He took responsibility for his silence. I took responsibility for my own, for letting resentment build without saying clearly what I needed. We were not a perfect couple. We had work to do. But we did the work. The lake house, as it turned out, resolved itself in the most unexpected way. Daniel's father Gerald, quiet, agreeable, shadow of Margaret Gerald, called Daniel privately one afternoon and told him that the property had been left equally to all 3 sons in the original will. That Margaret had been attempting to restructure the arrangement to exclude spouses' shares without the boys' full understanding. Gerald had spoken to an estate attorney himself. Your mother loves you, Gerald told Daniel. But she loves control more. I should have said that a long time ago. Daniel received his equal share of the lake house proceeds. So did Marcus and James. The restructuring Margaret had been quietly pursuing never happened. We used Daniel's portion as a down payment on a bigger house.
Ours.
In our name. Together. Marcus reached out to me 6 months after the dinner. "Helena and I owe you an apology," he said. No preamble. We went along with something we knew was wrong because it was easier than pushing back. I'm ashamed of that. I appreciated it. I told him so. I didn't pretend it erased anything, but I didn't close the door either. James and Priya visited us in the new house last spring. We sat on the back porch and talked for hours. Priya and I are close now in a way I wouldn't have predicted. She had her own years of navigating Margaret. She understood things I'd never had to explain. Margaret and I have not spoken since that dinner. Not out of rage, the rage faded. But because some relationships, once revealed for what they really are, can't be rebuilt on the same foundation. And I no longer have the energy to lay new bricks for someone who would only use them to build another wall around me. Daniel calls her. They have a relationship. It's careful and bounded, and he no longer allows her to speak about me the way she once did. He tells me she goes quiet when he enforces it, that she shifts the subject, that she is, perhaps for the first time, slightly afraid of the version of her son who stopped needing her approval. I don't know if that will ever change. I don't need it to. Here is what I know now, for years later and 1 year out from that dinner. I know that being quiet is not the same as being patient. I spent years calling my own silence keeping the peace when what I was actually doing was teaching everyone around me that I could be safely ignored. I know that a person who loves you but will not protect you is not yet the partner you need them to be. Love is not enough. Courage is required. I know that the vote, that cold, absurd, dehumanizing vote, was the best thing that ever happened to my marriage. Not because it was right, because it made invisible things visible. It forced a reckoning that 4 more years of quiet dinners never would have. And I know that the one vote that mattered, Daniel's, mine, ours, was never actually in question. We just had to find our way to casting it out loud. If you're sitting at a table where you were never really invited, stop making yourself smaller to fit. The right table has room for all of you. Clara. The end.